Yeah, I mean, I think the harsh reality is that referrals do dry up, right? And so for your entire PR and marketing strategy to be based on that, I think that can be tough because we know that there are lulls where we don't have referrals. I also think that today there are younger and younger individuals who are making more money, coming into money, who might fit more of that high net worth clientele. And you're probably not getting in front of them through referrals simply because we know that somebody my age, even younger, is on social media, is listening to podcasts, is, online where you might not be, right? That might not be a place where you're putting out information. And so I think you're doing yourself a disservice by relying on referrals sometimes because there might be a whole audience of potential clients that you're just not reaching because you're not seeking out those opportunities or you don't know about those opportunities.
This is the Future Ready Advisor, a show about transforming your financial advisory practice. I'm your host, Sam Sivarajan, a wealth management consultant, behavioral scientist, and keynote speaker. In this podcast, I dive deep into the real challenges advisors face and bring you insightful conversations with top industry experts. Together, we'll explore practical strategies grounded in behavioral science to help you better serve your clients, optimize your time, and build a future-ready practice. Hi, everyone. I'm your host, Sam Sivarajan. Welcome to today's episode of the Future Ready Advisor. Today, I'm joined by Barrie Cohen, a public relations expert and the founder of BC Public Relations, a boutique agency that helps brands and professionals elevate their visibility, shape their public persona, and build lasting credibility in crowded and competitive industries. Barrie has worked with top brands and thought leaders to craft compelling narratives that resonate. But beyond splashy media placements, what she really specializes in is helping people own their story, which, as many of our listeners know, is no small feat in the world of financial services. Today, we'll explore how advisors and executives can build authentic personal brands, even in a highly regulated environment, and why this matters more than ever in a trust-based business. Barrie, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Delighted. This should be a very interesting conversation.
Yeah.
Now, Barrie, you've built a thriving PR firm helping professionals and brands distinguish themselves in what is a saturated and competitive markets. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about your journey, what drew you into this work, and how did you find your niche in healthcare, lifestyle, and professional branding?
Sure. So I sort of fell into PR unexpectedly. I had a family friend who had a PR firm and gave me a summer internship, and I didn't even know what PR was. So that was really my first entry into the industry, and I fell in love. I loved how fast paced and exciting it was, that I got to meet all these people and socialize and work with clients who really wanted to tell their story. And so after working for other people for a few years, I realized that I really wanted to do this work, but do it differently in a way that was really based on relationships and fit how I wanted to do business. And so I started my firm in 2017 and it's grown from there. And so we work with clients across industries, many in healthcare, finance, wellness, lifestyle. And I think for me, being a creative, healthcare and finance are very foreign to me. And so those are really the only way I could be in those industries. I was definitely not going to be a doctor. I'm terrible at numbers. And so those were two things that I was never going to have a career in those, but I was fascinated by those industries and by the work my clients were doing. And so being able to work in these spaces, it gives me entry into those industries and I get to become a little bit of an expert in them and learn about them with actually not being in those industries, but helping the people who need it the most.
That's great. Now, on the intersection, I think, between PR, financial advice, and healthcare, you would agree that trust and credibility are critical in for all of those areas. So,
Absolutely.
in your experience, what would you think are the most common misconceptions that perhaps financial advisors and executives have when it comes to building their own personal brand?
Sure. I think the biggest one I see is that people feel like they don't have anything to say or they don't have a story. And I think it's really hard when you're in your own business. It's sometimes hard to see the things that make you unique or make you
Hmm.
stand out with the competition. And so I think often people feel like, well, I don't have anything to say, or nothing that I say is important, or I'm just saying the same things. And
Right.
I think it takes a professional, a PR professional, to kind of help you sort that out. And then I think the other piece is the budget. I think people often think that PR is unattainable because it's expensive. And it is an investment, but there are ways to do it that are cost effective, that can help your business. And so I think it's finding somebody who fits that and fits the balance that you need. But I think there's so much of the work that, CEOs and business owners and finance professionals are doing that are important, that people want to know, especially in the world today, right? We have so much going on in
Right.
the economy and in the markets. And like, there's ways to weigh in on that elevates your brand and allows you to be a voice.
Yeah, and I think that's important to, as you say, it's a crowded, it's a noisy marketplace, it's a very competitive industry, and I think in at the risk of being commoditized, you have to find a way to set yourself apart in how you're thinking, what your story is, as you say. So to your point, it's important for listeners to realize that there is a story and that they
Yeah.
do have something to say and share. But I think the other element, perhaps, besides the financial, is that many advisors hesitate to perhaps promote themselves
Mhm.
because they feel like it's self promotion, it's inauthentic, it's too salesy. What would you say are some small, authentic steps that you've seen work for advisors in a similar mindset to start building visibility and presence without feeling like this is a step too far from for their
Sure.
personality?
Yeah. I always say that, so many people tell you what you should be doing, right? And I think when it comes to PR, there's so many avenues. We have TV and podcasts and print. And I
Hmm.
think you have to find what feels most comfortable to you. Because if you're put in a situation where you feel forced, it's going to come off that way, right? And you might feel like you're trying really hard or selling, and the audience is going to see that. And so I always say, like, you have to find what feels good for you. Some of our clients love doing podcasts. Others want to be on TV. Others don't, because they don't want to be on video. And so I think you have to find the balance of what fits for you and your audience, right? And like meeting people where they're at. And so that can look like many different things and many platforms depending on where you want to be. I think it's also very similar to PR, where everything is so relationship driven and you have to come to the table without it being transactional. Anytime I meet somebody, that's the last of my thought. It's really about making that connection, and in the way you're delivering it, your tone, your personality, your demeanor, and people see that. And so I think really having that mindset of, I'm here as a resource, as an expert, as education for my audience or for the people who need me. I think that's how you can avoid those moments where you might feel like you're really trying to sell or promote yourself to forward. You're going to promote yourself, right? The end goal is obviously to get clients or leads or
Right.
sell a product or a book or something. But I think it's in the way in which it's delivered that can kind of avoid those opportunities and might feel like you're really selling.
I love that. I think it's a very important distinction that to move away from being transactional to kind of adding value. And as you're talking, what struck me is that advisors do that every day, right? When
Yeah.
they're meeting with a client or a prospective client, I mean, they are explaining to that client why they should be a prospective client, why they should be coming to me as an advisor. And I suspect what you're saying is basically what you're doing one on one to tell your story to a potential new client is exactly the same mindset that you're embracing when you're going into branding and PR.
Absolutely. And you've established that trust, right? They like you, they know you, they trust you. And that takes time, but it's all because of how you do your work, your process, who you are. And you just bring that same energy to the table when it comes to PR. Because we can tell, we can feel, when someone's trying to
Right.
sell us, right? And we usually run away, even when we're one on one with somebody. And so I think if you bring the same energy that you're bringing with your clients to any opportunity in the press, that's how you make that connection, and people will feel that, and that will drive those opportunities for you to get more clients or grow.
And I think that's a perfect segue to the what you talk about a lot, that's the power of storytelling, right? So you are telling your story. What makes a compelling narrative for a financial professional? and how can they identify their unique story when, let's face it, so much of the industry sounds like the same, right? I mean, when you've
Yeah,
got the nuts and
it's
bolts
true.
of things are generally the same, but that's not where you're telling your story, right?
Yeah. No, you're so right. I often think it's best to look at the people you serve in order to tell your story. It's not always necessarily about you. Yes, you might have expertise and things that, degrees and certifications and things that set you apart. But I
Right.
think it's also the people that you serve, and whether that's high net worth clientele, individuals transitioning their business or exit planning or, divorce, like all these moments and things that you provide, solutions for, right? You have clients that have problems and you provide solutions. And I think when you look at it that way, it makes it easier to identify the things that set you apart. And so I think often looking at your clients and stories, I think anything that's anecdotal
Hmm.
is really helpful. That's where we make the connection, right? It's about the humans behind the work that you're doing. And then I think that goes into really blending your personal and professional life. I'm not saying divulge all the things about your personal life,
Right.
but I think that's people want to know that, right? And that allows you to be a little vulnerable and connect. Like if there are things that you do that are volunteer work or philanthropic that like tie into your business or just something you're passionate about, or you do, you're very family oriented or things like that, that I think are really important to note when you're talking about yourself and the work that you do, because they all feed in together. And I think that's what builds the foundation of who you are. And so I think looking at those different aspects and combining them, I think that's what's really important when it comes to telling your story. So there might be five people on the block who are doing the same thing you are,
Hmm.
but what if your approach is different, or the process, or, how you talk to your clients, or you've worked with some clients for 30 years, right? Like there are little things in your business that you might not realize that are really important to pull out. I always say a PR professional will help you with that. But if you're on your own, like write your story down, write your timeline of how you got to where you are today, and look at those things and those elements within your life up until your career now, and pull those specific points out.
No, I think as you're talking, I'm thinking that look, it is who are you serving and what problem are you solving for them? And I think you had some great examples. Is it estate planning? Is it divorce? And I think to be able to narrow down to say, okay, this is specifically the problem that I solved and why the solution resonated, I, goes a long way towards that branding or that story that sets yourself apart.
Yep.
And the personal element of it is so strong. I totally agree. I think it's we downplay it, but this is a people
Yeah.
business, and
Yeah.
so your potential clients want to know who you are as a person and what you have that they can relate to that makes you the right advisor for them.
Yep.
And it just reminds me, I had a recent guest on the podcast who was a nuclear reactor operator who went on to financial planning and advice. And his whole business is a niche focused business that he serves people in the nuclear industry, people that are science backgrounds or engineering backgrounds, because they resonate with
Yeah.
that kind of technical brain that he's bringing, that kind of detail oriented focus. And so he's made, as you say, he's made a virtue of his personal background and journey to be able to attract the type of clients that would value that and actually look for something like that in their advisor.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's critical. We all want human connection, right? That we're all looking for that. And I think when you work with someone and you feel like they hear you and understand you and you feel seen by them, I think those are those pieces and those elements that make you want to hire them. As opposed to someone who's just talking at you or giving you lots of numbers or big words or information. Like, there's a right fit for everybody. And I think if you look at those pieces of your business and who you are, I think bringing those to the table are really important.
Now, you've worked extensively with individuals, brands, and companies dealing with high net worth clientele. For advisors that are serving, call it the high net worth or ultra high net worth market, what strategies do you suggest that they use to kind of position themselves in a way that builds both trust and differentiation in the
Mhm.
marketplace?
So I think it goes back to my point about meeting people where they're at. Because when you look at a clientele like this, and we would do this with any target audience we're trying to decipher, you really want to look at what they're reading, what they're listening to, what they're watching, right? Because it looks different for age and gender, as well as, high net worth. There's a lot of luxury magazines, right? So they might be in markets where there's a lot of luxury homes, luxury lifestyle brands, wellness, things like that. So you can kind of look at those certain opportunities because we know that they're going to be reading that, right? They're interested in that. They're in certain markets, expensive cities and mountain
Hmm.
towns and things like that. So we look at, where we can place your story essentially, where you would get in front of them the most. And that would be with any type of clientele. We're always looking at, where they're getting their information from, where they would find you the most. I think it's also because that clientele might have so much money and are higher net worth. You really want to, I think, position yourself as a resource. It's less about, I think, also selling, right? They get
Hmm.
sold to all the
Hmm.
time. I think probably more than others. And so I think really positioning yourself as a resource, but also building a community. I think, PR is not just one thing. There's press opportunities, but there's speaking opportunities and there's partnership opportunities. And I think really
Right.
engaging with the community and that community specifically, because they are smaller sometimes and insular where they're really looking at referrals and people they know within their network. And so I think building that community around them and engaging with other individuals in that community who can maybe help you. But I think it's also too about, again, what's the tone? What's your demeanor? What are like, it's not so much always what you're saying, it's how you're saying it
Yep.
that we feel the most.
No, totally. And I think there's research that says, to your point, that in our communication is maybe 15% or 20% the words that we use, and everything else is your body language, your tone, your personality that comes through in the way you speak, right? So
Absolutely.
now I'm sure you've dealt with lots of clients, including in the financial space. Can you maybe share with us an example of an advisor that you worked with to kind of get them on this personal branding PR journey?
Sure. So we have an advisor we've worked with for a long time, and she specializes in working with high net worth clients, a lot of women going through divorce. And
Hmm.
so when we initially engaged with her, and she's been with us for many years now, we were really focused on getting her name out there. And so we were getting opportunities in big publications and things that, from a shiny outside perspective, were really exciting.
Right.
But when we really looked at what our goals were, which were to drive clients and leads and get people to hire her, we realized that women were not really reading those publications. We
Okay.
weren't meeting them where they were at. And so it was a really great example for us to see, how can we get in front of this particular target audience? And when we started to do the research, we realized that most women who are going through divorce are not sitting and reading a newspaper or watching the news. They're taking their kids to school, they're going to their attorney's
Right.
office. And so we realized that they're probably listening to podcasts. And this was when podcasts were really starting to become a popular source for information more than just
Hmm.
entertainment. And so we started to look at podcasts that cover divorce, and there are lots of them, which you're probably
Wow.
not surprised about, Sam. There's
Yeah.
a podcast for everything at this point,
Yeah.
right? And so when we really started to niche down and target these specific podcasts, we started to get her in front of her target audience and started to see people calling her and actually hiring her. And we could
Okay.
see that ROI and see that process and journey because it's sometimes hard to track that in PR. And so with podcasts, which is a space we've now exploded in and do so much work in for all of our clients, we really started to see success and actually see it drive leads for her. And so I think um, and you would probably agree, I think podcasts are a great source for financial professionals.
100%. It's a great way to showcase your, your expertise, your knowledge, but also show the type of clients or audience that you're dealing with. And I love this example as a way that you showed, illustrating exactly what you talked about earlier about meeting your clients or your audience where they're at. You use the traditional glossy magazines or other channels to begin with, and realize that your clients that's not where they were, so you had to adapt. But to your point, this is an iterative process, and I
Yeah.
think it's something that working with a professional can help you kind of map that and be able to adapt your strategy as and when required.
Absolutely. And I think, a lot of PR professionals have a unique ability to see things that you often don't because you're in your business. And so we can often see maybe where you need to go or end up as far as audience or, platforms. And I think there's a lot of positive in traditional media, but maybe that's not where we want to be right now. Or maybe, you
Hmm.
think you want to be on TV, but there's other ways that might be more beneficial. And so I think it's up to us to provide that guidance and help our clients navigate that because it can be overwhelming.
And I think that's an important point. Media is when people talk about PR, I think immediately media is what comes to mind, and traditional media. Now, I think media coverage can be seen as a nice to have, but it's not a necessity. What would you say is the right approach to PR as a business asset, especially when it's so much broader than perhaps
Yeah.
traditional media, especially for service professionals who are relying on trust and referrals as their traditional source of business development?
Sure. I mean, I would say it's a necessity, but that's because I see it working, and I think it's really important to determine what your goals are when it comes to PR because they look different for everybody. I think some people want it to drive leads and potential clients and calls. Others want to just position themselves as a thought leader or a subject matter expert where they're weighing in on topics, which
Hmm.
might not necessarily drive business growth. Maybe they already have that. They just want to position themselves to have a higher profile and a
Hmm.
more public facing persona. I think that it's critical to have PR because I think it cuts through the noise, like we talked about. I
Hmm.
think when you're in a saturated market in one particular city or state or area, it can be really hard for other people to distinguish who the right financial professional
Right.
is, right? There's so many, and you might all be doing the same thing. But I know if I were to do some research and one out of the five is giving interviews or weighing in on, what's going on in the economy or what's happening today, I think I'd be more inclined to want to hire them because I appreciate their voice and I see that they're really trying to be a
Hmm.
resource for their community or for their audience. And so I think it just lends credibility, visibility, legitimacy to the work that you're doing. You can say to your clients a million times, here's how we do it, here's how I do things. But if people don't know that, then it's hard for us as a consumer to understand, right? Or to distinguish. And so I think when you put yourself out there in a way that feels good for you and you're a voice for a community or an audience that needs your help, I think that would be the distinction that would make me want to hire you.
That's a very important point when you talk about the credibility, visibility that it
Mhm.
gives. And you talked about being clear on the goals, whether it's lead generation or whether it is building a public profile. But I don't think those two goals are mutually exclusive, right? One leads to the other. I mean, it
Absolutely.
may not always be immediate and it may not necessarily be trackable, but
Right.
the by generating the credibility and the visibility, 3 months down the road or 6 months down the road, when the person is looking for an advisor that has got experience, for example, in dealing with divorce or dealing with estate planning, etc., there's something, and you reach out at that point, there may actually be some recognition factor that, oh, I've seen this person before and thought pretty highly of them, and that triggers the lead or that opportunity months down the road from when you might have created that branding or that PR.
Absolutely. And I think it's really good to note that PR is a long-term process. Like you said, it's very different than social media or other marketing where, you buy an ad and you can see that conversion very quickly, or you post something on social media and you see those followers.
Right, right.
PR is something that takes time. It builds. You have to trust the process. And I think that can be a little challenging sometimes because it's an investment and, we want that instant gratification, but it does work. I think you just have to be open and willing to go along that journey and experience the buildup. It doesn't happen right away. And so I think if you're willing to trust the process, that it works really well.
Yeah, and I think trust in the process, as you say, it's not easy, but to some extent, the advisors have done that in their own careers, right? I
Exactly.
mean, they're building a reputation offline, if you will, that is taken time to develop. You don't start in the business and immediately have a reputation. It takes time. And what is a crude analogy, I think what you're suggesting is that you're just transferring that thinking and that process into the PR, whether it's online or media, etc. It is a process. It does take a bit of time, but you're trying to take the reputation that you've created in your own profession, you're trying to do it at scale on a broader stage, and it just takes its time.
Absolutely.
Now, one challenge, as you well know, in financial services is that it's a highly regulated environment and there are very strict compliance rules for the
Yeah.
firms that the advisors may be working at. How, in your experience of advisors engaging in effective branding while still managing to stay within these guardrails? Are there any best practices or potential pitfalls you can share?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is we often want to speak in generalities. I think if you can run into an issue if you're giving actual financial advice, right? We
Right,
never want to say if you have X amount of dollars, you're going to get X back or
right.
vice
Or
versa,
buy X or buy
right?
Y. Yeah,
So
yeah.
I think that's the biggest thing is coming at it from a place of being a resource and educational. We're not giving actual advice. We're not telling people you should invest in this, you should do this. It's more about that story, right? Bringing in those anecdotal pieces, talking about experiences you've had with clients and experiences you've had in the industry, but in more of a general sense without being very specific about who those people are, money or
Hmm.
funds or things like
Hmm.
that. Same goes if you're looking more on the marketing side, like social media. We have to be, again, very careful about imagery and things you're putting out there. I know that there's a lot of strict guidelines when it comes to compliance about
Right,
using stock photos and imagery that have money symbols or dollar bills or right that seem like really silly, but I understand, right?
right.
We want to just be mindful of those things and again what you're putting out there. And so I think if you're coming at it from a place of education, you're okay. I think you just have to keep that in mind. And again, bringing it back to the people you serve, I think is really helpful because then I think it mitigates those moments where you might say something that would be an issue. And then I think too, like with compliance, like we've had to run stuff by them or our clients will run it by them,
Yep,
which is perfectly okay.
yep.
So I think just knowing that that's the process and allocating time for that. But I think if you are just more general and again about being a resource, being educational, here's what you've seen from your experience, I think you can avoid some of those
I
pitfalls.
like that. I think you're absolutely right. To take it from the education or being a value add instead of
Absolutely.
providing specific advice to a specific client
Yeah.
situation. I think that gets you out of trouble most of the time. And more importantly, advisors are used to being in one-on-one meetings or on a
Right.
phone call with their clients, and they know how to behave, right? So I
Yes.
think it's the same. It's not any different when you're on a podcast or in front of a camera or something else. I think those are the same kind of ground rules that you keep in mind. And still, obviously, as you say, before it's released or whatever, if you have to get this through your compliance team to make sure that it's passed as muster, I mean that's just part of the process. It's not a
Absolutely.
reason to avoid doing it, right? It's just a reason to start
No.
thinking about doing it in the right way.
Absolutely. And I would say, too, this is across the board in any industry. If there's something you don't want to say and you don't want it printed, then don't say it. Like, just
Yeah.
avoid it. If there's something that you don't want put out there, once it's out in the world, we can't take it back. And so I think with any industry, I would just be mindful of that.
Yeah, that's great advice, and it's it's in the moment, it's being aware, but it's
Right.
not that hard to do. It's if
No,
you just know that these are taboo topics or things that you
absolutely.
don't want to talk about, you just say, yeah, I don't really have an opinion on that,
Yep.
or that's not really the appropriate for this conversation, etc. Right? But there are ways to kind of make sure that you're not caught like a
Yes.
deer in headlights in those kind of situations.
Yes.
So. Barry, for those advisors who say that I get my clients through referrals, I don't
Mhm.
need branding, what's your take? And how do you think that the changing client landscape challenges that assumption?
Yeah, I mean, I think the harsh reality is that referrals do dry up, right? And so for your entire PR and marketing strategy to be based on that, I think that can be tough because we know that there are lulls where we don't have referrals.
Hmm.
I also think that today there are younger and younger individuals who are making more money, coming into money, who might fit more of that high net worth clientele. And you're probably not getting in front of them through referrals simply because we know that somebody my age, even younger, is on social media, is listening to podcasts, is, online where you might not be, right? That might not
Yep.
be a place where you're putting out information. And so I think you're doing yourself a disservice by relying on referrals sometimes because there might be a whole audience of potential clients that you're just not reaching because you're not seeking out those opportunities. You don't know about those opportunities. And so I think we're also seeing like women who are making more money than they ever have, right? And
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
maybe that's not a clientele you typically serve, or you're just not getting in front of them. And so I think there are so many potential opportunities to grow your business if that's what you want to do and get in front of other audiences that you might not be. And referrals can't always fit that or take care of that.
I couldn't agree with you more. You're right that there's all sorts of other channels, and I would say every advisor should be relying on multiple channels
Yep.
to diversify, etc. But even to the extent that there is referrals and that is a big chunk of your business, I think we're living in a world right now about trust and verify, right? So
Yep.
I get referrals from friends. I ask them for referrals for a contractor or something to do some work around the house. And of course, I value the referral that
Yep.
a friend gives because I trust their opinion. But I still then go online to Google and to say, what is
Right.
everybody else saying about this person? Is this worth it or not? And I think for somebody in 2025 not having a certain degree of a online or a social media presence to support that trust but verify mindset, I think they're potentially hurting themselves.
I completely agree. And I think it's much harder to build that back up if you haven't been doing it all along, right?
Hmm.
Like if you've
Hmm.
only been relying on referrals and then that dries up and then you're scrambling because you're stressed and you're not getting new business. And so I think implementing these practices ahead of time and starting to build that up, knowing that that takes time, I think is critical for those moments when there is a lull or when you might not have as many referrals. I think having multiple sources of business coming in is really important. You have to diversify where you're getting business from, and it's a critical practice, I think, for any industry.
And that's a great point that you made. I think this is a process. It does take time. You don't want to be scrambling when you're
No,
running out of ideas of where you're going to get
no,
business development. This is some work that you would have should have put in place well before you need to go to the well, if you will.
yeah, absolutely.
Barry, looking ahead, what shifts are you seeing in how professionals are building visibility and influence? And what would your recommendations be to forward thinking advisors that they start doing now to stay ahead in how they market themselves?
Sure. I mean, I think it goes back to the topic of the digital landscape. I think we're seeing everything being digital, right? Social
Hmm.
media. People are not reading physical newspapers, they're reading them in their email,
Right.
podcasts, YouTube. Like, we're really seeing the digital space explode and have opportunities where I think traditional media is still important, but I think really looking at these digital opportunities where again you can get in front of people in a very different way and more people at once, I think will allow you to stay ahead of your business, allow you to be proactive versus reactive, stay on top of trends, and really position yourself in a way where you can weigh in on what's going on in the world and be a thought leader. And so I think, again, looking at some of these options, if you love writing, I think blogs are great. Start your own
Hmm.
blog, contribute to blogs. I think if
Hmm.
you're open to video and interviews, podcasts are great. Newsletters are a really interesting concept today where you can blast things out to multiple people and be a part of other organizations or companies' emails. So I think there's a lot of opportunities. I think it's about looking into those. I would say finding a PR professional who can help you because I think, I'll plug that for a second. I think that's a lot to
Yeah.
handle, right?
Yeah.
But even if not, I think, again, looking at what you feel most comfortable with and like dipping a toe and trying it. If you're on LinkedIn, but you haven't been putting out a lot of content, like start a newsletter, see how it goes, write a few, see what the feedback is, and ask for feedback. I
Hmm.
think same as like if you want to be on a podcast, like put some feelers out, see who
Hmm.
might need guests, try one or two. And if you're like, I hate it, I never want to do this again, then and you don't have to put the time in, or you love it and you want to do more. And so I think it's about baby steps. I think it can be really overwhelming when you look at all of the options for PR and marketing today. And I think it's, again, thinking about how you want to tell your story and where and what feels good to you, and just trying a little bit. And if you need the guidance, having somebody who can help you.
I love that. I think there's so much to unpack there, but you're right. I think there's so much in the digital media landscape, and it's being comfortable, knowing what you're comfortable with, right? Just because TikTok videos are a big thing, if you're not into doing short
Yeah.
form videos, etc., you don't have to be
No.
on TikTok, right? You don't have to be on every social media platform that there is. Be on the ones that you're comfortable with. You don't have to be a blogger, a podcaster doing
Mhm.
media interviews and what have you. Pick the one or two things that feel right for you. But I think the key message I take in what you're giving, and I couldn't agree with you more, is that do something that you feel works for you to test it and be out there. And like anything else, including the world of financial advice, getting professional help and support at
Mhm.
the right time isn't a bad is never bad advice. So,
No, I agree.
Barry, we're coming to the end of our podcast. So, I have a few rapid fire questions for you
Okay.
that I ask all of my guests.
Perfect.
So, if you're ready,
Yeah, let's do it.
number one, professionally, what is the most important lesson you've learned over the years?
I think it would be to say yes to everything and figure it out later. I don't mean lie about your capabilities, but I think there were so many opportunities where I probably wasn't ready. And if I was too scared, I would have missed really big moments to move my career forward. So I would say yes, and then Google how to do it right after, and really teach myself and learn. And I think it's afforded me a lot of opportunities to grow the business.
I love that, and I couldn't agree with you more. I think any period of growth that I've had in my own life and career has been moments where I've been distinctly uncomfortable,
Yes.
taking on something, etc. But you learn through that discomfort, so that's great advice. Number two, what is one practical tip you would offer listeners keen on applying your insights?
Yeah, I think it goes back to my other point about starting with baby steps. Really see what all your options are. Engage with someone if you need help. I think you have to want to be out there, right? Like PR, you are going to be in the public eye and you have to want that. And so it's not for everybody, but there's other opportunities in marketing and PR where you might feel more comfortable. So I think
Hmm.
instead of getting overwhelmed, instead of saying I have to do six things at once, pick one, try it, doesn't work, you can pivot and try something else. That's what we do all day long. If something doesn't work, we ditch it, we try something else. And so I think just starting small in something that feels attainable to you and feels good to you, I think that's the best thing you can do to start on your PR and marketing journey. And then decide if you need help or not, or pivot if you need.
Awesome. Barry, this is, I think, a very timely conversation. We live in a world that is increasingly crowded and
Yeah.
competitive. I think it's very important for professionals of all stripes, but particularly financial advisors, to find ways to set themselves apart and to cut through the noise. So this has been a very helpful and insightful discussion. If listeners want to find out more about you or your work, where do they go?
They can find us on bcpublicrelations.com or find me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. And the listeners will find this on the show notes. So, Barry, I want to thank you for joining us today on the Future Ready Advisor.
Thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure. In this episode of the Future Ready Advisor, I spoke with Barrie Cohen, founder of BC Public Relations, about why authentic personal branding isn't self-promotion. It's strategic positioning in an increasingly crowded marketplace. Here are my three key takeaways. Number one, your story lives in the problems you solve. Barrie reminded us that compelling narratives aren't about degrees or certifications. They're about the clients you serve and the specific problems you solve. Whether it's guiding women through divorce or helping nuclear engineers plan for retirement, your unique story emerges from understanding exactly who needs your expertise and why you're uniquely positioned to help them. Number two, meet your audience where they actually are. The best PR strategy means nothing if it doesn't reach your target clients. Barrie's example of shifting a divorce-focused advisor from glossy magazines to targeted podcasts perfectly illustrates this. Women going through divorce weren't reading financial publications. They were listening to podcasts while managing their daily lives. Success comes from understanding your client's actual media consumption habits, not assumptions about where they should be. Number three, referrals plus visibility, not referrals versus visibility. The trust but verify reality of 2025 means that even referred clients will Google you before they call. Building authentic visibility through thought leadership, storytelling, and strategic media presence doesn't replace relationship-based business development. It amplifies it and creates multiple pathways for potential clients to discover and validate your expertise. Barrie's message is clear. In a world where everyone sounds the same, the advisors who thoughtfully share their authentic stories and expertise will be the ones clients remember, trust, and ultimately choose. You've been listening to the Future Ready Advisor. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts or a rating on Spotify, or share your feedback wherever you listen. Be sure to follow the podcast so you never miss an episode. For more insights on how to keep your practice future ready, visit www.samsivarajan.com. You can find the link on the show notes. There you'll find free tools and resources, along with exclusive bonus content from these podcasts. Thanks for tuning in, and I look forward to sharing more strategies with you in the next episode.